Really appreciate you guys and all these wonderful comments. Thank you, Tyler, if you're referring to what Ziela said. And Julie writes, currently getting a bunch of teachers to develop their lesson plans based on foundations and stacking. Wow, this is super. We're spreading. It's getting out there, which I want, and I appreciate it. This is just great, guys. All right. Well, wonderful. I actually have goals number 4 and 5. Everyday absolute ruthlessness. That's so cool. That's in. I don't know if I've imported that into the specific alchemy area. If anyone's only in that, but yeah, that's in the Law of Implication 2013 series. That's awesome. That's so great. Yeah, that really captures it, and a lot of what I'm doing in alchemy is fleshing that out in a sense. So that is just terrific. All right, I actually have some good stuff. It surprises me every time when I think I have great overall stuff, but it's great when it kind of comes together for a particular webinar. And this is one of those times that at least I think it has. I don't know how correlated that is to whether it actually happens or not, but at least I'm in a happy mood when it does, regardless of how effective that ends up being. Let me go right back to the slide before I ended up taking the bottom line here that I added and putting it on a new slide and fleshing that out. But just to kind of keep things tied together, there's a number of things we were talking about last time, right? We're kind of doing a parallel thing where we're looking at how to know what's true, and we're looking at that in parallel with goals and strategy. We started in phase 1, particularly looking at goals and strategy. We introduced the idea of self-image as a type of like meta goals and cluster of goals and deep goals and so forth, right? Standards and norms that kind of serve as like pulling and pushing on what we want and how we feel in our goals themselves. So that's self-image. So it still relates to goals very strongly. It's not just about teaching you how to make yourself feel more confident. As you can see, I'm actually looking at how to change the game when it comes to feedback-based confidence and all that. And again, these kind of deep goals that are hidden that affect our more surface goals that we are more aware of without our realizing it. So we're really looking at goals, and we're going to continue with that today. I have an insight about goals that is holographic. Again, it's contained. It won't be fully new, but it also will be probably a new angle or somewhat new angle on things that might be particularly like an aha thing. So there's the goal track and there's the how to know what's true. And the goal track is nice because it shows like a very practical and tangible use, and it is where I really use. I'm discovering more and more that in practice, the whole idea when I talk about how to know what's true, seeking understanding, it's really about goals, right? Which ones I want when, and again, what I'll share in a little bit will further show you how intertwined those two things are and how that's my focus. It's not like my focus is on like reading a news article and trying to figure out that what the reporting says is really true or not, like that type of thing. It's nearly as much, or it's not like I'm solving a murders or something like that. It's much more about trying to figure out what I want to do regarding my goals and other people's. And it's not about setting goals. It's every moment you're dealing with potential conflicts with goals within your own mind and then in other people's. And that really captures, that's kind of a bit of my aha thing. I guess maybe I can skip to this here. Okay, this is pretty great. Making sure I'm showing my screen, recording and all that. Okay, everything looks kosher. I'm not muted by accident or anything. All right, so I wrote how to know what's true, and the following rest of the slide is not explaining how to know what's true, but it's tying it in even further with goals. So what I could have said is, if I wanted to write a lot more, is in practice, here's perhaps the most important, most common use and why it just matters so much practically, the idea of how to know what's true. And it's this. I'm reading from the slide now. It primarily matters because of the massive ongoing problem, when I say you face, I mean you and me, face of conflicting goals. And then I wrote a little bit smaller print, the fine print, the ultimate block to our success. I know we might hear that type of thing, here and there. This is so important, that's so important. But I'll read this and then I'll say something about importance, actually. But the ultimate block to our success and happiness involves our relative inability to deal. And when I say relative, I mean as it gets better, then we'll have more success and happiness. And to the extent that it doesn't get better or it starts out worse, then we have less success and happiness. So the ultimate block involves our relative inability to deal with conflicting goals in our own mind. And when I say deal, I'm going to mean dissolve, resolve, and that sort of thing, not just like sit there fighting harder. um, our relative inability to deal with conflicting goals in our own minds and regarding the minds of others. Which in practice for you, it also means dealing with when there's conflict between either a goal in your mind or just the appearance of your communication and a goal in someone else's mind and so forth. All right. What I just wrote has been within what I've been saying all along in a sense, right? Who knows, I might have even said something that's almost exactly this. But there's a way that it kind of hit me with an additional clarity, and that saying it really straight out in this way I think is going to be helpful. That because because I had another slide even prepared before Saturday, like before the previous webinar a few days ago. Let's see. I just wrote this. I'm just going to refer to it, and I'll go back to where I was. But I wrote time management as vector management, and a vector is like a force in a direction. So if someone's nagging you, or either nagging you or just excitedly saying, "Let's go out to eat," "Let's go out to eat," while you're trying to get yourself to work for a little bit extra, then that's like a force pulling you away from finishing your work. I'm not even saying it's a bad or good force, but it's clearly a force, right? If you're trying to feel like working for yourself or spending some time working for yourself is important, and there's somebody in your life kind of diminishing that, then that's a force working against feeling like it's important and useful, beneficial, to build for yourself your own offer, your own work skills that you can use as part of like a personal offer rather than just a resume, and so forth. Okay, so vectors again is just like kind of communications or trigger, like things in your environment, or your own thoughts, your own goals, pulling you in various directions. Vectors are just like, it describes like a force pulling or pushing in a particular direction. Vectors involve force and they involve directionality. And I wrote time management as vector management. And what I mean is that what I just meant I kind of made this as a note for myself that I might cover, but it kind of tied in with where I was going a little bit, so I just thought I'd pull it up and also show. I was talking about how this type of idea shows up in various places. So I'm having a little bit of a cough for 1 second. I'm basically doing totally fine. I'm not really sick anymore, but just that residual kind of time when there's a little bit of a cough or something once in a while, especially if I'm talking. Okay, so this could be when you're just scheduling a block of time, or it could be or it could be you do a task so it's not niggling at you. But I've always thought this previous slide, and I wrote this other thing on the bottom here, which will be relevant at some point, probably today or soon. Distinctions and boundaries don't push or pull. That's a kind of a fascinating hint that if you can gain enough clarity about a way of doing something, the property rights thing as an example, or if you need to work on a stable base of income and you're clear about that for some reason, then it's interesting. There's a certain way that certain things that could seem like a goal or sound like what could be a goal, like aren't really goals, but they're distinct. Ooh, sorry, I'm just getting a note about if there's any applications that I can close. So I might be experiencing degraded audio quality. Can you guys hear me all right? How is it when I talk? Not that I could do much about it if you can't, but good. Okay. All right. Great. I just got that note. Kind of. Okay. Great. It's kind of just jumped out at me. All right. So um, this is maybe somewhat tangential, but not actually. It's all just about the same basic idea. It's all really um, about what I'm talking about here. I won't necessarily be able to fully explain this right this moment, but it's sometimes it's helpful to indicate things and then come back to them. But you can there's let's see here. So let's say you schedule half an hour where you're definitely going to be working on a particular website task, and you have your phone off and so forth. Then that distinction of, okay, for the half an hour I'm doing this, it could be phrased as I have a goal to do this for half an hour, but there's a certain way that it's also like a boundary that doesn't really push or pull on you necessarily. It can actually do the opposite. It just kind of sits there still and can actually relax you. So there's a way that I'm figuring out. I'm getting kind of a new thing about goals that I'm working on, where goals, in one sense of understanding them, right? So they might be used colloquially. The word can have a lot of things, right, as normal. But there's a type of way that goals can be normally where they're pushing and pulling, right? It's kind of I'm sorry, not just they're pushing and pulling, but they're what your mind does. In a sense, it's what your mind does full stop is work towards the goals, but it's all part of the system of operating in the gray area when you don't have clear, like kind of absolute knowledge. So it might turn out that what we often think of as goals, or it might be like the berries thing where there's different berries, but they all look the same, and we didn't realize there was two different types until we learned to distinguish them. Right? That's like a cluster, also an example of a cluster where there's good and bad berries. We just thought there were berries in general. They looked alike, and we just thought that when we eat berries, we get some nutrition, but we also feel sick regularly. But then if we differentiate them, then we see, okay, these berries make me feel sick, or they make me feel sick if I have too many, or they make me whatever. They're good sometimes, bad other times, and these are. But you have that distinction with the two different types of berries, and then you use them when you want, right, at the right times. Similarly, there's something going on with goals that I hadn't fully. I'd used this pretty consistently, but I hadn't noticed it in this way before, and I don't think it's really out there in popular thinking or even secret thinking that I've seen, and that I think there's a distinction that we're going to be able to really start to take advantage of, and we understand it better. But and our whole backdrop though allows us to, one of the reasons I'm confident in saying that this probably isn't out there in people's thinking generally, even in people that think about goals and success, is because there's a number of things we can't even start to think about or guess or have thought of in life unless we have the backdrop I've given you of the consciousness field, the world of reasons, you as a being, thinking of you as not your mind at all, and going, you think of your mind as a goal achieving mechanism, thinking in terms of knowledge, gray areas, things you don't know, things you do know, um, thinking in terms of method when it comes to knowledge, all that sort of thing. When we see the world that way, then we can come to additional realizations, conclusions, clarity that we couldn't possibly have unless we had that backdrop. Kind of like if we have calculus, then there's a number of types of problems we can solve that we couldn't do without calculus. So when we understand the world with that backdrop, then there's a certain type of way of goals that is what we normally think of as goals. That's generally going to be something that only exists within a gray area when we're trying to accomplish something and we don't know, or the situation. And certainly we can see that because goals make sense to be future oriented. There's a certain things we can't know about the future. Right? Pretty much every. I mean, basically we can't know the future. When I said there's certain things we can know things like if in the future I was to add 2 plus 3, I would get 5, right? So we can know things like that. We can know like conditional statements like that. But then in terms of knowing how the future is going to end up being configured or play out, right? Then it doesn't exist in that way, and we don't know. So goals would be applicable then, and what I'm saying is they would kind of pull on our mind and pull on the rest of the world of reasons, right? The world, the environment, and kind of pull what our goal is into reality. It might not be successful, right? You can pull without fully accomplishing pulling what you're trying to pull to where you're trying to pull it, right? But the pulling still exists, right? If I have a heavy carpet that's rolled up, I'm trying to drag up, upstairs, and I pull it hard, and I get it to the first stair, and I can't pull it anymore, and I'm still pulling, right? I might not achieve the goal that I was going after, but the pulling exists. So the fact that I'm trying, I'm pulling still exists. That goal is active, right? If I'm pulling and it's existing. All right. So if goals can only kind of survive or operate or be relevant, or that type of goal that pushes and pulls, it's only applicable in the gray area that we don't know. And if we look at that, it kind of sheds some light on certain things. It shows another angle on how ridiculous it is to have a goal for the past. But that's very common, right? It further sheds light on this idea of how if someone's like, oh, I expected a different result, so I'm upset. Like, I still want that different result, even though it's over. Well, why is there something pulling or pushing when we're no longer in a gray area? When we see that goals only make sense, right, that can only really exist in the gray area, and otherwise they just exist as contradictions, like they're inherently contradictory outside of a gray area. And like believing in them is just sort of believing in and acting on a contradiction every time, whenever it's not a gray area. And then we can also sort of start to see and feel how a boundary, which can come from a distinction, right, a clarity about something. And keep in mind that you can have a boundary that's distinct without having full knowledge of what's on either side of the boundary. So you don't need full knowledge of like everything about something or even a geographical location to have a boundary or a fence, right, or something. You just need to have the distinction. Or have a few points like I talked about last time where you can tell the difference between one thing and another. And if it's clear you want one and not the other, there's a way. Now, again, if it's something you're trying to pull into the future, then that introduces that. But there's plenty of things that end up being like, I use the word heuristics, which is like a way of operating. There's plenty of heuristics we can figure out. I wrote that on the screen, H-E-U-R-I-S-T-I-C-S. There's not really a great perfect synonym for that, but there's a phrase like a way of operating, a way of doing something. Protocol is sort of like that. There's heuristics, and I've given you a lot, but I'll show you other. Examples will come to mind as I keep talking. But there's ways of operating that will constantly make sense, including what we'll be looking at here. A heuristic is like, don't have a goal for the past, right? That's a way of operating. It's a distinction. And as you see it as a boundary, like you don't need to have a goal not to have a goal for the past necessarily. You can have a distinction or a boundary about it where it's so clear that it doesn't pull or push, it just resolves things. It just sits there reducing the gray area passively, but very helpfully. But it's not like being pushed and pulled has a drawback to it. As now with saying that, let me pop over here. Right, conflicting goals. I want to have one other slide that is relevant. How about this? No, that doesn't say it perfectly. Okay, let me see what I have here. There's this. Nope. I'll come back to that. Okay, we'll just stay with this slide. The one about where I said it primarily matters about knowing what's true because of the massive ongoing problem you face of conflicting goals. So the big kind of total aha here, potential aha, it doesn't have to happen right this moment, but this is, I think, going to be really cool for you. Specifically, listen, we're not going to want to have two or more. We're going to really want to have exactly one actively triggered, actively working goal going on for ourselves at any one time. And when we're working with other people, when we're involved with other people, we actually want the same thing, sum total, with all the people that are kind of currently operating together. And I don't mean with anything like this, it's not about feeling bad that you don't accomplish it, of course, right? We're just knowing what we're going for here. And as I'm going to keep looking at this idea about boundaries versus these active goals that are pushing and pulling myself, and try to I have a pretty good inkling of the difference. I might even talk my way into it partly in this webinar. But what we're looking for is to get clarity about things where something we might have otherwise called a goal, we see it as like a boundary or a heuristic or a distinction, where it doesn't push and pull at us. It just kind of calms things down and actually makes decisions easier and makes what we're trying to do in the moment and make decisions and operate um, with whatever other goal we're working on. It makes it easier and more clear. Where when you reduce the gray area, you like the amount of decisions you have to make and the way you're kind of looking to try to figure out how to get to the answer. Then just like crossing off dead ends in a maze, it just makes you kind of calmer, more confident, more effective, more efficient, everything, right? So there's a way that as we learn to transform these pushing and pulling goals that are kind of multiple goals in the same gray area, which just causes stress, confusion, inefficiency, we want to get down to where we boundary things out and we clarify so that at any one moment, there's one active goal going on and the rest is boundaries or really as a boundary, so just sequestered till another time. And there could even be like an open, like let's say you're watching a kid, a child, and they're mostly fine, but you need to kind of keep an eye out in case of an emergency, and then you're working on something. You can have like an open alarm system, an open eye, whatever, towards a trigger where you switch priorities. But that in and of itself is a way of operating. It doesn't need to push or pull at you. It's just, oh, there's a signal. I need to switch my attention to the child, right? But until I do, then I have my attention or the active goal on what I'm working on my computer or my mobile device or whatever. But in practice, it comes up constantly where people have multiple active goals in their own mind, and then especially with other people they do, like going on with them, right, that they're interacting with. And this clarity about this and explaining it this way is something I'm realizing before this webinar and on this webinar, but it's definitely a major way that I operate and that I've been for a while, and my mind and so forth. Like I've just kind of looked at the situation and seen it this way, but realizing to explain it this way is pretty helpful. That we actually, and again, this is like another type of heuristic or boundary. When you understand something in the right way, again, it switches from this thing pushing and pulling and causing more conflict and confusion for you. It switches into a boundary that reduces the confusion. And you're feeling this. I'm getting this. The feedback is very clear at this point, where this is happening for you, right? You're actually resolving all sorts of conflicts for yourself throughout this time with alchemy. And of course, you've done it before you met me and whenever it happens. But there's a certain new clarity about it and new tools that you have for dealing with this. And now we're getting even more specific that that's exactly what we're doing. And when I talk about removing contradictions, the place that removing contradictions becomes relevant, it involves goals that get triggered. And because really our beliefs, even like our belief system, our model for the world, it's also related to goals. They're just like very intimately related. I'm going to a little bit say that and not get into why they're related right now, but they're just, they are. Information, you get so much information in the world, which information you remember and gets assimilated and noticed is a function of what is interesting or important, which is to your mind, which is a function of goals. And then people often have a goal to actually keep believing what they believe in their mind, right? It's like an active push. Why do I say goal? Because it's like an active force pushing and pulling and protecting and so forth. They can get triggered. Even in a mind that has a lot of contradictions, most of our potential goals in our mind are dormant most of the time, by the way, but they get triggered, right, by the situation and so forth that's coming up. But when we don't realize this about conflicting goals, then these goals are getting triggered, and then multiple ones, and we'll feel like, crap, I want to do this, I want to do that. Oh man, this is a setback. I planned on doing things this way, so the goal is still active to do things as if there wasn't this what's called a setback. And now we also have to deal with a setback. So it's like I have a goal to deal with a setback, plus I have my original goal to like accomplish my main goal as if there was no setback. as if the setback kind of never happened. Um, and what we want to start to do is ask and then answer, well, how do I do this? How do I get to where I have one active goal, right? If we have 0 active goals, then it's not really, um, there may be times like when we're sleeping, right? Perhaps when meditating is the goal, that's the idea of it. But even then, you're trying to let go of your thoughts, kind of actively, I believe. Maybe it becomes like a boundary or passive at some point, and then you get like particularly calm. So perhaps there's times to particularly relax by dropping all goals, and maybe in meditation that happens even stronger than when you sleep, and maybe that's why people get such results from it. Um, I basically believe in meditation, but don't happen to actually actively practice it much currently. I have to some degree in the past, but it's never been a big part of my repertoire. But I do think it's effective. It's really, there's just only so many things that we happen to do in practice, but I may well get to that. There's a I probably sort of passively or somehow do something kind of similar to meditation. I tend to be aware of my goals and aware of dropping them and taking them on and intensifying ones I want to intensify, dissolving ones I want to dissolve. And so that probably gets me somewhere similar, but it might be I should actually at some point, when I say should, I'm calculating that it will be worthwhile to try out, seeing experientially how adding some actual meditation fits in. All right, but with meditation, you're kind of dropping it all, right? You're throwing the baby out with the bathwater in essence, and that could be beneficial for a time, presumably. I don't know for sure, but it seems very feasible that dropping it all would allow our brain to relax, our mind to relax, and our body, therefore, in a certain way. I like participating in massage, giving or receiving it. That's very similar because our body kind of stores goals and tension, like kind of goals and thoughts and so forth, literally in our muscles too. And that's why a massage actually releases like active goals. And that's why it's so pleasurable for so many people, including myself. Although I don't really have a lot of tension when I'm massage, it's just more, it's obviously the other thing is just intimacy is nice and touch. Okay, let's see here. But it's kind of like a mechanical form of meditation in a sense. Without, I mean, on a kind of a simple level. I'm not trying to come off like an expert one way or the other with meditation or massage. Let's see here. All right. So as we delve, and now what I'm going to do now is go and take a look at another one of the ingredients of that you're going to use in knowing what's true. But we'll combine it to a greater or lesser degree. And I'll be developing all these themes. There's a major theme I'll be developing. And really, I always have been, but it's kind of further develops the theme of goals. But this is what we're doing with the methods of knowing what's true. When I talk about matching and fitting and how our brain twists understanding, what we're trying to do is we'll be pulled in two different directions. Now we can notice that, and then we figure out. And I've already given you tools, right, for this to a large degree, and I'll keep giving you. But what's the building block I want, right? What's the objective? When I talked about playing to win in the 10th webinar, and when Jamari referred to he likes my videos on ruthlessness in that 2013 series about goals, then you're setting yourself up with boundaries and clarity, so you can kind of go after one thing, only. In one space, in one kind of mental space, in one time space, right? And that is so much of how I get where I am. This is so much at the heart of how I have such effective relationships, and that I'm not worried about them breaking up. And it's how I get effective results all over the place, is I'm constantly identifying and clearing the way to work on one thing in some kind of boundaried off space, by both time and even my physical environment. It's such a difference. Like if I'm working in my office, in my basement, and if someone comes down and they're sort of waiting for me to finish, then my whole body feels different, right? Why? Because I have two goals at once. I'm trying to finish what I'm doing, my email, my communication, make sure that I don't um, uh, get it wrong, right? A lot of things I do, kind of doing it kind of precisely and getting things right is a lot of what I'm involved in, especially getting communications right and decisions right and so forth. It's not really a lot of template driven stuff. I have heuristics. I have a whole bunch of things I understand, and then I apply them kind of freshly to new situations and think them through carefully and get them right. But then if there's someone else kind of waiting for me physically in the space, and I'm using this as a illustration of what I mean by boundary by both space and time, not being like metaphysical or mysterious here. I just mean like in my basement, if someone's physically there, I can totally feel it. And I'm not really used to feeling tension, so I notice it when I do. It's kind of funny, right? I'm generally um, relatively or probably extremely, but not perfectly stress-free. Again, because you don't have stress, you just kind of have a nice inflow kind of excitement when you're working on one thing. The minute there's two, and it's fascinating. I mean, all it takes is like a person kind of standing there waiting for me to be done, even politely, like totally politely, totally like it's okay, but like they're waiting. And now I totally feel differently, right? And and I'll often actually be less effective. Like I can see the results. Sometimes I'll make more mistakes and so forth in what I'm doing. I'll be more prone to messed up links in the membership area, when I'm putting stuff, updating that and so forth. Um, or I would otherwise spell check, not like with spell check, just kind of go over like kind of grammar check, just read over what I wrote, and I often catch something in an email, and then maybe I won't or whatever. So my body feels different and I'm less effective. And of course, that's always going to be the case when you have conflicting goals. You can even do what people call multitasking, and it could sometimes be effective depending on what you're trying to do. I mean, because they could even be boundaried even within a few seconds, as long as it really is you're doing one thing, then you're doing something else when there's a trigger for a little while, then you're back and you're doing the other thing. And really, if they can be triggered and put aside within seconds sometimes for some people and in certain situations. Just it also again depends on the actual task that you're doing. But often people think that they can and they can't, right? They think they can listen on the phone to what someone's saying and check their email. Whenever I try to do that, I end up screwing both up personally. But I feel it. I feel like I can do it, right? But then I know at this point I have memorized that basically not to. And then not to even look, because if you look, it'll kind of trigger the goal to read to click in and see what this person's saying. So you have to I tend to keep my life pretty trigger free, except for when I need it. Then I'll have triggers, right? Like email open or a phone on. But I'm aware of whether my phone's on or off. And I'm aware of how prone my phone could be to getting messages, which isn't very much. And all that stuff. So everything to do with triggering other goals that could be conflicting is something I'm pay a lot of attention to. It might be a slight exaggeration if I say I'm always aware of it, but I'm pretty damn aware of it, and I am intentional about it, and I like it. I think it's the right way to operate. And this idea is really definitely correct, and then you have to make your own judgments just based on strategy at any one time, what triggers you have open and what you don't. See if there's anything more about this specifically before I kind of skip back to how to know what's true. Let me talk to you guys for a second. Let me go to the Facebook group. And then I'll have one more idea to talk to you about. That's like one of the how to know what's true ingredients that I haven't talked about yet. Let's see. Kevin wrote, "Hi David, I'm really enjoying alchemy. I have a question and apologize if a similar question has already been asked." Oh, we're good here. We're there's other plenty of things to get worried about in life besides questions being repeated. How can I use alchemy towards resolving my dislike or resistance to networking? Oh, that's a potentially great question. When I say, sorry, it's a great question. And it's a potentially one that I'll be able to answer effectively now, potentially not. We'll see. Uh, I know I won't be permanently screwed doing it. Great. Okay, right. If you go network, you won't be permanently screwed. Oh, I'll be able to apply this. I just popped into my mind, which is not me, but it popped into my mind, and my mind stuck into my consciousness field for me. How to relate this to just exactly what I was talking about here about the multiple goals. What's going to scare, and I'll continue to read in a moment, but one of the things that's going to scare you about any task when you're going to have like approach avoidance to something where you want to do it but you want to avoid it, is we'll feel afraid of, like, in essence, we kind of fear getting stuck, right? But really what gets us stuck is conflicting goals. And so if you think about what you fear about networking, it's like going there and having to accomplish more than one thing that is kind of like a black box, like kind of opening up two black boxes at once. Like if you're going to a place where you haven't really met anyone, and so you don't really know what that's like, and then if you're also trying to like get actual contacts where you go home with certain information, and you don't know really what that looks like, then those are like it turns out to be like two different creative tasks, two different open-ended things. Like you want to go there, because when you show up at a meeting with people, especially that you don't know, then you sort of are going to have a goal for them not to just reject you, or you'll have a goal to like not screw things up, right, with them. And naturally, not because you're wrong, just because that makes sense, right? And then if you have a second goal, which is to make contacts and to feel like you accomplish something that way, and especially if your goal is to like make a feeling of like good contacts, people that are kind of already starting in your sales funnel, so to speak, then that's actually two goals, and that feeling that's going to come from that is what's unpleasant. This thing about the multiple goals is going to be just shattered, like incredible, like earth shattering. Is again, it's been within what I've talked about, but probably this will hit a lot of us with renewed clarity. That's going to be something. That I don't mean that fully answers your question, but it's a really cool tie-in to what I was talking about, and it's kind of a one angle on the full answer to your question. And what you do then is when you realize that, you just boil it down to like a one goal, and this relates to the semi-soft locks. Is you're trying to find something where you're comfortable, where it's like a one creative task, not two, where you can kind of reach it in kind of one creative step. So if I was starting out networking and felt avoidance to it, which I can identify with really easily, I'm more of an introvert and so forth, then I would try to boil it down to where I didn't have any further goals about going there. My goal would be to like go there and just kind of go with the flow, or something along those, something that worked for me, right? You can tailor that to yourself. And then let's say you go and you intended to go with the flow, but you ended up kind of showing up, not really saying much to anyone and leaving, and you reflect and you think, well, that wasn't as good, but at least it's less of a black box about what it's like. Then you might go next time to the same group or a different group and say, let me see if I can make a bit of a more effective goal, maybe to kind of say hello to 3 people and ask them what they do. And that might feel like something that you can kind of do in one creative step at that point. And then you'll feel it. You'll really feel it whenever you boil a situation where there's conflicting goals down into where you get it to where there's one. You'll feel like that release of energy where you're totally motivated. And when I say totally motivated, I don't mean like you're walking around like you're halfway done with a Tony Robbins seminar, or something like that. You're looking for the hot coals to dance on, but you just kind of feel like that normal or nice feeling of like, yeah, let's go do this. You just kind of want to do it. So there you go. It's really amazing when you if you feel uneasy, not, this is a different thing, but just related. If you feel like uneasy, like you wake up feeling uneasy or something like that, then it's going to be multiple kind of creative or tasks or black boxes, however you want to think of it, kind of goals for the future. Again, goals in a gray area, right? In something where you're not quite sure how to get to it. Because let me point something out. The future is unknown, but it doesn't feel unknown about stuff like if I'm going to drive to Starbucks, even though theoretically, like a few minutes away from where I live, that I've gone to plenty of times, even though like technically the future is unknown, right? uh, that's not like a goal in the sense of that it's going to push or pull on me just in practice, right? So it's not like if I have to drive to Starbucks and plus I have to make a phone call that I'm not sure about. And that's not like two creative goals, right? That's one that's clear and simple. And once I say that, you can just kind of tell the difference, right? If your mind doesn't feel it, like it's a creative gray area, then at least you're not going to get the effect of multiple goals. Now, your mind could feel fully confident and certain about something that turns out to be wrong, and that could be a different problem if it matters. And it might not be a problem. Maybe I'm sure Starbucks is where it is, but it closed down, overnight. And then it turns out that Starbucks is closed, and then I just don't. I have to go somewhere else to get coffee, right? Or I don't get coffee. That's fine. I still didn't feel creative, like a tension for the different goals. I didn't get the result I wanted. In other cases, you might feel totally confident about something and it doesn't. It's wrong, and that might cause you a problem. That's a different issue, and then you want to figure things out better in the future regarding that. But in terms of this issue that I'm talking about today with the multiple active goals, if your mind doesn't have something where it's pushing or pulling, even if it's in the future, but just because it feels clear and confident about it, then like walking down the street somewhere or calling up someone that you know well, right? Um, then like if Mike Long calls me, right, which happens like every day and it's nice, then I don't feel like, oh, this might be like a difficult creative task. Even though when we talk, we have a lot of creative stuff going on, it doesn't like pull me. I don't know. It doesn't do that. So you just want to be aware for things that do feel that way and not have more than one. All right, I got through 2 sentences. Let's go for the rest. I know I won't be the third. I know I won't be permanently screwed doing it. I typically have an okay or even fun time when I do it, but I tend to be more introverted. I asked because I had a business open and closed last year and filed bankruptcy. I know I could have networked and marketed way more than I did. This was the third time going into opening and running a practice, and I still resisted networking. I asked because I want to join OMG next year, and I know that the networking prospecting could be a great way to get started. So I would like to either work to resolve or minimize this, or should I just try to go about it from another angle for client getting? Well, there are other angles. I mean, definitely figuring out like what your block is, what's going on with the networking, could potentially a place that could be helpful. It's a bottleneck for you, right? Like it kind of slows things down for you. It's not necessarily a full block. And in your case, even just reading some books on networking, all of this, anything that increases your clarity, people often have good strategy. Networking is the kind of thing that, people, in all humility, people don't need me to have figured out well. There's going to be a lot of great stuff out there about it. Just strategically, you probably don't need more motivation. You probably need to resolve something, dissolve something. You can look at things from multiple angles and play the scenario out in your mind and try to figure out where it's going wrong. Like if you were to imagine, all right, I go to the meeting, what kind of thing could be like a failure? What could go wrong? Or imagine yourself saying, wow, I feel bad about how that went after a meeting, and then you can work backwards and say, well, ask yourself, what happened? And then you might, something eye-opening might come of that. If you imagine feeling bad and then ask how that happened, right? And in most cases, you're not it's not often, you don't always want to imagine feeling bad, but in this case, it's probably a good strategy, right? It's not, when I say imagine feeling bad, just kind of briefly, right? Pain's a signal. Experiencing pain, emotional or physical, as a signal is fine. You just don't need to wallow in it or think that you should feel bad about it. Right. So I'm not saying feel bad and then feel worse, but just imagine feeling bad afterwards briefly, and then ask yourself what happened. And then as you'll probably, with maybe looking into a bit of reading and then doing that exercise, you might develop some more clarity. And what you'll do is you'll narrow down the gray area, because ultimately I don't want to do the thing where when you have a hammer, every problem looks like a nail, but this is kind of the ultimate hammer. Is in essence, everything boils down to having multiple active goals, and the pain and tension and ineffectiveness that comes from that. Literally, I could um, somewhere along the lines of certain that pretty much we could boil any problem down to that. It still will take strategy and thinking and working at it sometimes to tease it apart, right, and figure it out. But once you know fundamentally where to look, then it's nuts. Like knowing to look at life this way is going to be pretty massive, I think, for everybody. Great. So awesome, awesome question. And that said, one other thing is that one of the great thing with like OMG and what you learn is you're learning these valuable skills where and maybe that's part of it. Maybe having these particularly valuable skills will help you with networking. Maybe that's one of the things you're kind of you feel like you're lacking or you're lacking, and you might not be. I have no way accusing you of not having valuable skills, but you get what I mean. Maybe having even more additional valuable skills or something could possibly help. It just depends. Um, but I know personally, I like kind of marketing in the sense of first I'm kind of tapping into where there's already kind of momentum or vectors in the direction where there's like interested people. Kind of like with dating, I really liked the idea of online dating. It was a very new thing when I was dating. But it was so amazing to me because I'm like, wow, there's all these, like in real life, it feels like nearly everyone you meet is already dating somebody. And then even if they're not, it's like you're going against where their vector is in a lot of cases, unless they just look at you and swoon the minute they see you. Like in most cases, people aren't like actively looking to be propositioned or even like asked to coffee or something like that. Or even if they are, then there's kind of social blocks towards saying yes, even if they kind of like it or whatever. Of course, it can work, and I met people in real life just fine. But and when you're not in like groups or college, it's at least a lot more resistance, a lot like the network. What can happen to some degree with networking. Although networking events alleviate a lot of that, right? Because people are there to talk and network, as opposed to just walking up to someone on the street and starting to get to know what they do and seeing if they need SEO work done or something. But but online dating, they're everyone just looking to talk to people and date and do like dating, at least like the beginning part of dating and chatting, right? And so it was amazing. And then they would have a profile and they kind of talk about what they wanted, which might not be what they actually want, but it still gives. But when you deduce from it, right, it gives an indication of at least what they think they're supposed to want, and it gives so much insight. I mean, being able to read hundreds or thousands of profiles from girls is just an entirely new thing that never existed before the internet, right? There's no analogy to that outside of the internet. All you can do is watch like sitcoms, right? Think about how you get your window into the world before the internet. Even with the internet, of course, it's all skewed, right? With Facebook, stuff that people put and everything. But just imagine before that, it's like you have your own life, your parents, right, that you watch, and you don't see them all the time. You just kind of see what they present to you, right? And then you have like TV shows, right? And that's mostly it. You have what your friends report to you, and you have your own life experiences. So there was like having like profiles to read. It was just amazing. I skyrocketed my understanding of women basically by reading that. It just was just amazing for me. It was like that information. And I think people can approach online dating in a way they do not skyrocket their understanding, but if you look at it in the right way, then you can skyrocket your understanding if you're seeking that. Okay, it looks like I was breaking up for a couple of people. I'm sorry. Hopefully the recording. I always have a recording on my computer, which is good, and I'm not getting that message anymore about the sound. Jim Crane wrote something that might be helpful for Kevin. And you're really right. When I look at Mike Long do this, who's amazing at this, people that are really good connectors, they really just look to more provide value, including by bridging groups, like bridging people, introducing people to other people and stuff like that. Jim Crane said networking is about service. You build relationship by asking others about themselves. You're not trying to get something. You will get something by giving them something of value. Excuse me, that changes everything. Thank you, Jim. Great insight from Jim. It's pretty obvious that Jim must be quite good and successful with this. And this is the great thing about OMG is we get people who are actually doing things, and we're hearing from out of their experience, which is way different than just hearing theory. Oh, that just reminds me kind of randomly of something that I was talking about earlier. from me, I want you to be aware of this. One of the big value propositions that you're getting from me, and I get this, I'm saying this mainly for your benefits. You don't miss it, not because I need even more pats on the back from you guys. Not that I ever mind those. I accept all pats, but just so you get the kind of the full value. A big service that I do for you, like when you're getting information, right? There's a number of sort of potential bottlenecks for that information. One of the big ones is like whether it's correct or not, and that is part of my service is the correctness. But actually, there's a hidden thing that's even more of like a unique USP, like unique selling proposition for myself, or kind of a unique benefit. And in this case, I don't mean like unique for the world, but just something I'm particularly good at. And I'm not even claiming it all perfect at or whatever, but it's definitely a strength of mine. Is is in not just what information is correct, but what's important. So literally the very fact that I'm covering something, this is where so much of my effort actually comes in, and it's why structure is extra difficult for me. Structure is really easy if you don't care about importance, right? It's very easy to come up with like a whole course, all of which has points that are potentially useful and so forth, right? I can give you a checklist, 20 different ingredients or ways to think better, right? And they could all be basically correct. But the problem is that if you don't get importance right for people, it's wildly less effective than if you do. Right? If I can say it really comes down to this thing, and let's look at it from different angles, rather than like there are these 20 things that are all helpful, that sort of thing. But and be aware, be wary. If I say something and it seems like it's not important, then you might be right. Again, I'm not claiming infallibility, except in certain areas. Like if I say 2 + 3 = 5, I'm very confident of that. But double check, like kind of have a red flag or a second guess the times when something I might say seems like least important, or when you might want to ignore it or not even realize you're doing so, but do that. Then that might be the most valuable thing for you, because I'm actually telling you something's important that feels very unimportant to you in that case. And if I'm right, then the differential is that value to you, right? The more unimportant something seems to you, and then it turns out to be important, the more of a service I've done for you. And again, I want you to get that service. I love the pats on the back, but especially I don't want you to miss out on that. So you could miss out on the biggest values that I have for you because of the importance thing is the bottom line thing that I'm going to do for you. And so like watch for that. And when I say, sometimes I'll say this is important what I'm about to say, right? And of course those times in particular, and even going back, because I can say that, you can hear it, you can agree, but it can get lost, right? It's on the 6th webinar, or I'm just picking one at random, right? And we cover more stuff, and there's a lot of stuff. But there really isn't that much stuff in alchemy. It's constantly, in essence, more angles and building on one way of looking at it is a few like key points that are so important that I'm trying to keep looking at them, right, with you from different ways. So I remembered that. I started to talk about that earlier in this webinar, and then Jim reminded me with what he said. You're welcome, Kevin. You're very welcome. Three's Company, that's where I learned my dating expertise. That's awesome, from the sitcom Three's Company. Mahir wrote, in terms of setting non-conflicting goals or distilling many goals into one main goal, I've been having trouble prioritizing. Right, exactly. But that's great. The first step is to just to make a tongue-in-cheek joke, like admit you have a problem. But that's a great thing to identify, and that's why we're learning about thinking accurately. There's books that talk about like how to think or how to think accurately, but they're not really in demand that much, and they're not really necessarily that effective for like helpful for people to read. Although they're probably more helpful than they think. Actually, they're probably decently helpful for people compared to not. But when we realize that it's about getting your goals right, because we need to have one and only one active one at a time in a particular time and space, And when I say need, never in life do we want to feel bad about anything, including something being suboptimal, right? That's that in and of itself is like a goal. Like now I have like I'm conflicted, and I also have a goal to not be conflicted, and that's another tension on me. That's not what we want. We want the opposite. We want it to function like a boundary where we say, oh, I have multiple active goals right now. I realize that itself is the problem. Let me go about resolving that first. Pretty much, in another way to put it, it's pretty much always a priority. So your one and only goal, I'm about to say something kind of clear and important for a change. Your one and only goal, when you notice you have multiple conflicting goals active, you can actually have a new way of operating where the priority becomes, they're the new goal, and you drop everything else, becomes resolving that. And what we need to do is have a quick and dirty way to do it first. So you can do it like in seconds, because if something's going on, right? So, like obvious stuff like, well, let's say someone said to me, they heard me say that, and they said, well, David, what if something's life-threatening? Well, then all the more reason to realize you focus exclusively on the life-threatening thing and drop the rest of what you're conflicted about, right? And really, we don't have that problem if there's something life-threatening. We generally will drop the other goals and just deal with the life-threatening thing. So you see that what I'm saying isn't going to be a problem. So either something's life-threatening and you're already focused on just one goal, right, which is the life-threatening issue, or something was life-threatening and you were that was being interfered with some other goal, and you didn't realize to drop the other one, and taking a few seconds to realize that and drop the other one and just focus on the life-threatening thing will help you. So even if there's a life-threatening situation, what I just said is still correct. So again, we have a new fundamental way of operating. Whenever there's multiple conflicting goals, it is better to deal with that. And what we want to do then is get efficient and effective at doing that. And fundamentally in life, if you can become efficient and effective at doing that, then you will kind of get everywhere. That'll even get you to like relationship with God, interestingly enough. So I'm out the importance of having a relationship with God and loving other people and so forth. When I say that, it all relates. Because when we're looking to get our goals straight and tiered, T-I-E-R-E-D, right? Where again with priorities, what priorities? Now we can see what, and I'm not leaving off Mahir, right? But he asked about priorities. When part of how to think, and I've referenced this in the last webinar, I believe. One thing that I told you to do in practice is you start to examine the key words when you have a question. So in Mahir's question, he says, been having trouble prioritizing. So we can ask, well, what does a priority do? And remember, I told you something else early on. I said that when people try to think deeply and start to ask what words mean and what concepts mean, they can't, like they realistically can't. They kind of need to give up because they don't have the foundation of how to, in their life. They haven't answered the fundamental questions that I've already helped you answer. I don't mean that you fully get it yet, but I've addressed them, right? Who we are, how we differ from our mind, who our mind is, God's existence, how we fundamentally interact with the world as a being, and so forth. So I've literally addressed those questions with you. If you don't have those addressed, actually, when you try to think through things like this question Mahir has, and you start to do it in the correct way, where you say, well, what's a priority? Or what is the nature of priority? What does it mean? You end up tangling yourself up and just feeling confused. You might get to some kind of false feeling of closure, or give it a set of words that kind of feels satisfying and fits. Remember I talked about fitting last time? That feels like it fits into your model and makes sense. And it might even be a little bit helpful, but you're not going to get to the bottom of things properly without the framework that I've been giving you and will continue to develop and help you with and navigate you with. Because we have that framework, or whatever amount we have of it, but we will just say for the sake of argument, because we have that just a basic framework that I've given you about how life works. Then when we look, and in light of what we talked about today, the new revelation from today about multiple conflicting goals, and you want to boil it down to one active goal that's operating in the gray area, right? Trying to pull things in the way that you want. Then we can see the nature of priority becomes clear, or might be about to become clear, or can be looked at, with additional clarity. If we of course, overall in life, we can have different gray areas and different things that we need to work on, right, and make happen. We might feel responsible to some degree to our family, and different parts of our family, our parents, our kids, our spouse, whatever might be our family. Of course, we have different families, but however it might be. We have goals regarding career. We have goals potentially regarding health, hobbies, and so forth. I'm not saying overall in your life have nothing that could possibly be active except for one. What I'm saying is you only want one actively triggered one. So now how do we have a mind that realistically is going to have multiple goals that could conflict if they were all sitting there trying to be active at once, right? If I have a goal to relate to my family and I have a goal to work on my website, then those can easily both be accommodated effectively in a life. And it's not really exactly about balance. That's an overly simplistic way of looking at it. And I have that in one of my notes as examples, is taking a look at balance in light of another thing that I had for you. But it's kind of trite and simplistic to just say, well, we need balance. You don't need balance, you need clarity, right? And part of clarity will be the effect of balance on the surface. But you want to have priorities, and what priorities do for us now, we can see, is they help us to have the right active goal turned on at the right time. And remember, once we know, or maybe it's not remembering, but notice, once we have a boundary, a clarity that we want to have one and only one goal, then we don't even have to know what a priority is. Whenever we do know what our priorities are, then great, and you'll be able to distinguish plenty of priorities, don't worry. But then if there's two goals and you can't figure out which one should be a priority, what do? Remember law of implication. You focus on what you know. You know you want one. You know you can't really tell the difference in which one should be a priority. You also can know that you remember me saying, wait a second, David said if you can't tell the difference, well, at least especially relative to yourself, the difference can't be important, right? It might be ultimately if you were to know, but you don't know enough to know, right? Exactly. You pick one at random, flip a coin, or use your intuition is perfectly fine. Intuition, people talk about when do I use my intuition? When there's a gray area, like basically when you have to pick at random, you can use your intuition. You can use the one that feels more right. But before you use your intuition, you have as much as you can know, and you don't even check your intuition. Your intuition can be wrong. When you know things properly, it won't be wrong, right? Some days if you check your intuition about whether you should get up that day, it would say, no, don't get up. Or some days your intuition would say, get up, and you realize you wish you didn't, right? So your intuition can be wrong. But studies have shown and so forth, and even logic, if you think about it, what you want to do when you think like consciously is focus on what you can know. But second guessing in the gray area can actually and usually studies bear this out, you guess worse, right? So if you're guessing, intuition's fine. But really life isn't about guessing better. It's about narrowing down where you have to get, like the parameters and the boundaries and all that about guessing. and then whatever you guess should pretty much be all right. This is the way it works for me, and the way it obviously logically works well. I'll read Mahar's exact question in a moment, but this is all good. So priorities help you, and priorities don't need to be like absolute. It's a mistake to think, okay, my wife is an absolute priority over my career, or vice versa. And that very idea of the possibility of that can be poisonous in both relationships and career. Instead, and then you also don't need to think in terms of balance. You could just think in terms of strategy, right? Like the effect is one of balance. I don't mean that balance is not some terrible thing, but it's not like you're striving for balance. You're just striving for the correct amount of each, the ideal amount of each, which again, it might seem like splitting hairs. It's not a big deal. I'm not trying to die on the battlefield of quibbling about balance here or whatever. But you're just trying to get it right. And how do you get things right? You cross off as much black or white area as you can, right? You make distinctions, and then and then you guess within the gray area, right? I know that spending 10 hours a day right now with my family is clearly not going to make sense, and I know that spending less than 1 hour is not going to make sense, and so then I eyeball it in between, right? And and really, or just whatever. And if I want to spend 10 hours a day with them, then I just build to that, right? So I can have that goal um, where I'm trying to create it. But again, one thing we can do is we can set goals where they're actually not actively pushing or pulling on us. They can instead be used. Oh, I know. We can have goals that we use when we're planning, and they're only active when we're planning. So a goal like getting to where, this is pretty profound actually. It just kind of occurred to me to say it in this way, but because of all the other, again, like the gray area resolved itself for me while I'm talking because I have so much colored in, right, like black and white. So I have so much background. So some goals, like if we were to say, I want to spend more time with my family, rather spend roughly 3 hours a day instead of roughly 1 hour a day or more. Or I want to wake up in the morning and think about them first rather than work first. Then what we do is that goal can be active while we're planning. I've never realized to explain it this way before, but not active while a different time. We're not active while we're spending time with them, not active while we're saying goodbye to them, not active while we're working on our career, not active even while one of them is saying, I wish you'd spend more time with me. You can be calm about that because it doesn't need to trigger an active goal to spend more time with them. You can say, I do want that, and I'm planning for it, right? And then it's active while you're planning. It's pushing or pulling on your planning, but in an effective way, like it's coloring, or it's an ingredient or being added, like alchemy into your planning, or whatever. But again, it can push or pull just at the right time. And maybe there's something we could discover about planning where you overall have kind of one vision about how you like things to be, and then you're looking for how to make like a lot of my plans, by the way, it's not a roadmap, it's identifying bottlenecks, identifying building blocks, right? It's not like I'm not looking to make step-by-step plans. I'm looking to get a sense of importance. Just like with these webinars, it's not so much about step-by-step, it's about identifying what's important and building around that. Thank you. I appreciate that, Sean. Today's a good day if I want to get nice comments and so forth. Michael Moynihan wrote, the process of elimination to derive a predetermined result, further defined by reason. Can't argue with that. All right. Okay, so let me just actually read, including for myself. I haven't read it in my head because I've been talking. Mahir wrote, in terms of setting non-conflicting goals or distilling many goals, and I sometimes add a word or an ending on purpose just to make it fit, even if I'm wrong, in terms of distilling many goals into one main goal. So I'll repeat that. In terms of setting non-conflicting goals or distilling many goals into one main goal, and great point about that, that's correct. I have been having trouble prioritizing what main goals I want to achieve. I want to spend some of my time on Amazon because I feel some sort of scarcity that if I don't leverage the time I have now with the live Amazon webinars, then I'd be facing resistance later on and will not have the same resources I have now. I primarily want to focus on Amazon just because of the time leverage factor. And I'm already seeing a hint here, right? We can have it active regarding Amazon during live webinars, and then maybe during implementing some of the stuff that's suggested to do during the week, during a live webinar. And then that can be quarantined off, that can be boundaried off. So you can allot a certain trigger to that, when it triggers on, when it triggers off. If there's multiple goals that are kind of needing to follow timelines and involve other people, then it's perfectly fine to have them going on in parallel, like over a few weeks where they're both going on during those weeks. Because they're kind of waiting on some other people to do a task, or they're involved with these live webinars, and then you just boundary them within that. Like as I said, like have triggers and timing and within the day, within each day, and I don't mean each day. I don't mean each day literally day by day. It could be 0 time in a particular day, right? But you, as long as you have any sort of boundary, like for me in practice, if someone is upstairs and I'm in my basement and they're on the main floor and they're going to be happy when I come up, it doesn't affect me. It doesn't affect me in a negative way. I'll complete my work efficiently and then go see them, and it's all fine. I don't mean it doesn't affect me like I don't care. I can care about my son and my wife and be happy to do what I'm doing efficiently and go up there when I'm done. But it doesn't make both goals active for me in a way that's counterproductive or either with my feelings or with my actions. So just them being upstairs is plenty versus in the room, physically in the room. Similarly, you can start to notice what is actually effective for you in just having one goal triggered and on and off at the right time. And it's, I think it's not, I'm not belittling anything. I'm not trying to make it sound too easy, but it's pretty doable. Like, and you, especially on like a continuum where a lot of times you can turn goals on and off, I think, with just some awareness of things. A little bit like what I illustrated, right? Where they're just upstairs. Or if you just picture or say to yourself, okay, I'm going to work on this for half an hour and then I'll get to the next thing. Really, if you just communicate with your mind in a pretty simple way, and when I say communicate with your mind's doing all the talking, but just take that for the simple meaning of it. I could say if you as a being lead your mind to communicate with itself would also be accurate, but it doesn't matter. We can talk normally as well. At some point, I'll elaborate on that. But sorry, I just got the genius of clarity. That's great. I'm glad I'm used to being the genius of confusion. So it's quite an accomplishment if I'm being appreciated for my clarity. That's a whole new day. It's a whole new phase of my life. Sorry, can't help that chuckle there. Let me not lose my thought. But I was saying that if you communicate with your mind, so to speak, where you're just like, okay, I'm going to do this until such and such a trigger, and then I'll switch. And your mind is like heard, then it can turn off a goal often and say, oh, okay, cool, we'll do this, and then we'll do that. And just saying it, you can write it down, you can picture it, you can say it with words, and you can just get a sense of what's effective. If you say it with words and it doesn't seem like your mind is getting it, then try to picture more of a scenario, or you can write it down, or do something, but all these things communicate with your mind or potentially communicate. It's not that different from talking to someone else, right? You say something in one way, they don't get it, you try a different way, right? And eventually you write it down on a big sign and you hold it up in front of their face. So whatever works, right? Let's just see here. And you want to ride, he's saying, also another reason to focus on Amazon is to ride a wave of trends such as Pokemon Go, Halloween, etc. with my Amazon coaches asking questions as they arise. By the way, another thing you can do is work through what would happen if you missed that and see how you can always get it next year or something like that if you wanted to. And you can also notice, hey, that is suboptimal. When I picture missing it, no, I don't want to miss it. Because if I compare it, you kind of get a sense of resource management this way, right? Like another way to look at life is via resource management. And when you picture, all right, well, what would I miss out on if I missed out on it, and get that kind of clear. And that might not cause you to dismiss it. I'm not saying you would say, oh, I see what I would miss out on, and that's no problem. I don't care. You might care. You might say, oh, I'll miss out on that. And then if I use my resource a different way, what will I miss out on, or what will I get? And then you can look at what you'll get versus what you'll miss out on if you spend all your time on, let's say, Google SEO stuff versus if you spend half your time there and half your time on Amazon. And then just make a resource management decision. And you can feel comfortable with whatever decision you make once you kind of look at it with reasonable clarity. And once you look at it with reasonable clarity, if you can't tell the difference, you can say, look, either way is going to be fine. And if I can't tell the difference, I can be comfortable with any decision I make, right? And I'll worry more about places I can tell the difference in life and just get moving. I can tell the difference with if I get moving or just sit here worrying about it. I can tell the difference that getting moving is going to be better, right? Once I've thought it through reasonably, then it becomes, there's a time when it'll be pretty clear that just taking action one way or the other will be, and being done with the waffling about it will be better. Currently, I'm trying to go for the semi-soft lock of ranking my SEO site and learning Amazon on Tuesdays. That's probably realistic depending on what other things you have going on in your life. And just try to get a sense of if it's realistic. And what you can do is just give it a shot. You can just go for both. And what do I say? Always be seeking understanding. Go for both and say, look, really what my goal is going to be right now, again, and let me stop and as a side and say, guys, you'd be surprised. You can reframe so many of your goals, maybe all the time. We'll see, but it might be a universal. It might not. But one of the things you can try is reframing goals that are difficult, that are causing you issues. Reframe it to seeking understanding about the same topic. And in this case, what I mean is, look, instead of the goal to like necessarily like succeed or be at a point where Liz would say, yeah, you did it just what I wanted you to do, in your own head. I'm not talking about Liz here, but where you imagine like Liz says you're successful, or where your bank account says you're successful. Instead of that, say, look, I'm going to increase my understanding one way or the other. I'll reframe my goal to that. That will probably be even more effective. When you reframe a goal to seeking understanding about the topic, it tends to just help you in every way. And then go for both. And it'll resolve pretty quickly. You'll get a sense of whether you can do both. And then if you can't, if it seems like you can't, and again, sometimes we have to eyeball things in life, right? But once we're at the point where we're eyeballing it, we're back to where the difference isn't enough that we need to worry about the difference, and there's something else to worry about in life instead, right? We'll work on something else other than worrying about the difference and eyeballing it. If you narrow it down to where you can see it fairly clearly, right? After say for 1 month, I'm going to work well. I'm going to really try to do both, and see how it goes, and then reflect and see, and be comfortable with whatever you eyeball from there. Clown. I just want to keep reading what Sean writes. There's certain compliments that particularly hit the spot, and that's one of them. Genius of clarity. I have it at least from one person forever. Oh, great. Worried me there, Sue, about me being muted, but we're good. Dudley writes, and I had that right with Dudley, right? I'll see if I get the top up here. Just checking. Yes, Dudley, great. Okay. Dudley, hi, David. This is a bit off topic, but may be helpful to look at some of the work of James Schwartz, Vedanta teacher. I presume meditation, right? He speaks about the apparent world. Oh, maybe just about how the world is, okay? Existence. You could find some of his videos on YouTube where he demonstrates that you're not your body. Would be interested in your thoughts about what he teaches. Yeah, I'm gonna be looking to look into some of these things. There might be a week where I look into it all. By the way, it's not bad. I want to look into the book called The Field that Faith recommended. I think Mahir mentioned something too that I might look into. What we're generally going to find is things like, and I'm not saying this has anything to do with what this teacher, James Schwartz, is saying, but for example, the idea that like the physical world is an illusion. I'm not saying that, right? I'm saying something different and I think clearer and more accurate. It's not an illusion. We just want to understand how it's real and how it's not. Because remember I referenced last time, real refers to its degree of foundationalism, actually, once we understand what we really mean by the word real. And so, like the way the world seems in terms of our model for the physical world, like the way that it seems like the room continues even where you're not looking, right? Or the hallway continues, right? We all like, to me, there's a hallway, in back of me here, right? I probably see it briefly, but you guys know what a hallway is regardless. So there's a hallway. It seems to me, in one way of looking at it, I'm so used to looking at the world the way I look at it that it kind of doesn't seem that way to me, but of course I can look at it the old way as well, so to speak, in my head. And it seems like the hallway exists just in the way that it seems to exist in the part that I can see, down the hallway where I can't see, right? But neither the hallway that I can see, so to speak, nor the hallway that I can't see exists out there in the world of reason and code and the physical world of code. It doesn't exist as it appears in my consciousness field. So the hallway doesn't continue the way it seems to. In that way, of course, in another way, it does. In another way, it is real and foundational to it in a certain way. Just like when you're playing a video game and you're running around in a forest in the video game, then then there really is code for the forest. It really does continue when your character in the video game goes on. It really will appear on your screen. There is a reality to it. Um, and the reality kind of, you can dig down to a certain point and still find reality to it. And then if you keep digging, it's no longer there, right? It kind of stops, terminates, like at the code in the computer or in the mind of the coder or somewhere. But then that's the end of the foundational nature of it. So it's real in the sense that it doesn't only exist in my mind or my consciousness field, which are not the same thing. But neither does it exist foundationally as like a basis itself for reality and so forth. So like the physical world, for example, again, is not an illusion. And then when we understand we're not some people will say you're not your body, you're made of energy. You see what I mean? They're always staying within a certain box that we can be out of, right? Where they're still basing things in the physical world as like fundamentally foundational, or even the metaphysical world. But the metaphysical world isn't foundational either, right? Not in the way that they're talking about it. There's, it's made of reasons. It's made of reasons why. When I say the world is made of reasons, fundamentally the external world, or the world of reasons is made of reasons, it's reasons why you and other beings are aware of what they're aware of, why your consciousness field is configured the way it is now and next moment and next moment. That's the world of reasons why that is. So we look at the foundational basis of the world in our consciousness field and in us as beings. And the world is based in that. That's the reason for the world. That's the reason for the physical world is to have a basis for your consciousness field. Being the way it is rather than something else. And not only yours, of course, everyone's and so forth. And that's how I build the idea of what I mean when I say God. What I mean when I say God is based, and again, we want to base all our definitions referencing ultimately our consciousness field or concepts that then reference our consciousness field, but the foundation needs to be your own consciousness field because that's what you're aware of. For you, relative to you, that's the basis for your thinking and your reality and so forth. It's subjective in the sense that it's yours, but it's not. It's objectively real for all people that your consciousness field is what it is right now. It's objectively true for me that your consciousness field is the way that it is. It's not subjective to me. It's not a relative truth. Your consciousness field is only seen by you and God, right? Only experienced by you, but it's objectively what it is and not some other way. That's important to realize and to not go down the wrong road. It might not be important this moment or for your week, but it's important when someone starts thinking about deep topics like this stuff, the nature of reality and so forth. When you realize that your conscious field is objective reality and objectively true in the sense that it is the way that it is and not some other way, then you're starting thinking about it properly. And God is the cause, not the reason, but the cause, a being with actual power, an entity with actual power to change consciousness fields. And that's God. Or that's at least what I mean by God. Me defining that doesn't make it true, but thinking about it accurately reveals that it's true, if you do so. Maybe I will actually put off the next thing I was going to cover for the next webinar. I don't want to tease you too much, but let me see what Shema. Sorry, jumping around here. Let me see what Shema wrote. This may seem like a small goal, but I struggle with it for years now that I don't have to get up to an alarm. Currently, I'm a 12 a.m. to 8 a.m. sleeper. I want to be a 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. sleeper. So far, nothing has worked successfully to make this switch. Could use this as a sample to work through with alchemy. Sure. First of all, only have that goal as a pushing and pulling thing actively triggered when you want it to be. And what I mean is the goal to sleep at a certain time and to get up at a certain time only needs to be actively pushing and pulling on you when you want it to be intentionally. So let's say it's 11 p.m. and you have something else to do. You can stop and think, wait, do I want to have the goal of doing this other thing, or do I want to have the goal of getting to bed? as soon as possible and pick one. Resource management, just decide which you'd rather do. And if you can't tell the difference, pick one at random. All right, so that's one thing. You don't want to have goals like this triggered or open at the wrong time. That's where you get tension and conflict. And that's the big aha, of this webinar. And it's pretty cool, right? That's one thing. Now, in terms of actually achieving it, then always our method is to start to build what we can know. And the first thing we check is, do I have a foothold? Do I have something I can, and if you don't, then you start poking around. You might say, well, what's a foothold? Well, do you have any clue on how to start accomplishing this? If you don't have a clue or a clue of where to start, then you poke around for a start. There's a website called brain.fm that I actually subscribed to recently. Cotton recommended it. He used it at times. He said he doesn't use it that much currently, although I like it. I've been using it. Actually, my wife is using it a bit. Brain.fm, and it has. Oh no, I spelled that wrong. I'm kidding. It's spelled right. It has these sounds that are apparently based on science and experiments. And again, sometimes you just guess. You make an educated guess, but you could try that, and they have a thing where it'll go for 8 hours. So what you can do is also, it's hard to sleep when you have active goals, right, triggered. So you want to work on letting go of your goals. For you then, meditating for 15 minutes. And all that is, when you're meditating, you want to have one goal at a time. And when you're meditating, the only goal should be letting go of your thoughts. Give me one quick second here. Okay. Just had to check something quickly to make sure it wasn't an emergency, and it wasn't. We're all good. All right. So you want to let go of your goals. One of the things that keeps you up is your active goals in your mind. And meditation, you can just sit comfortably or stand comfortably, and you can look into some information about it if you want. But the basic idea is that you're kind of noticing thoughts, but those thoughts are going to be related to goals, ultimately. And you notice them kind of like an observer, and then just try to let them go when they come without beating yourself up or like pushing yourself that you're not doing it fast enough or well enough. Another thing that can come into play, and I realize you are falling asleep and you're not having trouble sleeping, but in one sense you are at 10, right? So there's a few things you need to do. You need to also schedule for your not to have actual things that you need to be doing. So it's partly scheduling and clearing out. Most everything in life involves clearing stuff out as part of your strategy, right? Because of this multiple goal thing. So you schedule it, and then prior to scheduling it, you might have something like meditation. There's also, you asked also about context at one point. One example of context is that you could be at 3 p.m. driving somewhere and talking on the phone or otherwise not letting your brain talk to you. There's a certain amount of talking that your brain's going to want to do with you, like letting you know things, that thoughts that it's having and so forth. I'm being kind of simplistic when I talk about it that way, but you get what I mean. If you don't give it the time that it needs to talk to you, it'll take advantage of the time when you're sleeping. I've talked about that before. Like you could picture it like if you don't listen to your wife, then when you guys are falling asleep, then that's when you'll be listening to your wife, probably. I'm not referring to any actual people here, just kind of as a funny thing, but just to illustrate what I mean. And your husband as well. Okay, not to be gender specific here, but regardless. You can trace the whole thing though to the real difference with the reproductive situation with men and women, and you would expect women to be more geared towards social connection, right, and talking in order to be just naturally biologically. Obviously, our bodies are designed and our urges are designed and our brains and bodies are designed to reproduce, right, and to keep our species alive. Um, Everything about how we're designed is to keep us alive so we can figure things out, right? It's not evolution that did it, but that's a separate story. uh, anyway, one way or the other, and that would mean that from that theory, we would guess that on average, women would be more wired to talk socially and things like that. Of course, individuals can vary, and I'm not even claiming that's correct, but anyhow, it's interesting to relate it um, to actual differences. Anyhow, your brain needs a certain amount of time, like talking to you and being listened to, and if you don't listen to it, then it'll do it when you're trying to sleep. So give it that time. You could do it when you're driving instead of listening to the radio or talking on the phone, or you could just do it naturally when you're walking or some other time. Yeah, absolutely, exactly, Shema. It's interesting, and it really works. I gave this advice to my wife when she was having trouble sleeping, and it was effective. It's just how minds work. There's certain things I don't even need science to figure certain things out, you know. um, so, this isn't like a life and death thing. If it doesn't work for you, it's fine. But in general, it's a kind of an effective advice. So you basically combine. You want to clear things out. Combine that, listening to your mind, giving it time to talk to you, scheduling. Maybe if you need to a little bit of meditation, you could just put brain.fm on for 8 hours, starting at 10, and it might help sync you as well. Because some of this is biological, and then you could poke around for other things that can give you a foothold, possibly read a book or two that might give advice. But what I said might really do the trick. That's probably going to be effective for you. So we'll see. But of course, it's can't know for sure with things like this. Sean wrote, lol, that's exactly what I am doing while driving or alone in my room. I'm always talking to myself, and people sometimes think I must be crazy, but not these days, right? You can have a Bluetooth, uh, uh, as Jamari said, and nobody thinks you're crazy anymore. And when I say listening to your mind, that you don't have to actually talk out loud, although it can certainly help. And literally it does. I personally don't really. I guess to keep the habit, so I don't get taken away. I'm already crazy enough, right? I don't want to give people an excuse. But certainly whatever works for you, that's great. Jamari said, I have a live example from this Webby. In order for my mind to know I hear it, I exclusively addressed a goal involving another person that my mind kept rehearsing. Now it's quiet because I gave it that time and the conflicting goal is dead now. This is powerful stuff, David. Killer, and thank you for sharing from your actual experience, Jamari. That's great, so other people can get from that example and learn. And I wouldn't have known to suggest that exact thing without what you said. Incredible. Sean wrote, man, I have missed your alchemy sessions, David Mills. They're amazing sessions. Love the wisdom and your views on our reality of our world. Thanks for the work you do. Agreeing with you. Brain FM, see, another user, so to speak, is a fantastic tool for neurolinguistic programming. Excellent. Yeah, it also has a mode where it helps you focus either relaxedly or intensely. And then it has one that helps you nap. So yeah, everyone can use that as a pretty cheap subscription for the whole year. It's around $50 that I subscribe to, and you get a number of free sessions before you use it. No affiliate link, wish I had one, but just good stuff. You're welcome, Marcia. You can catch the rest of the replay, as you say. Sean wrote, thank you, David. Your way of seeing things is mind-blowing. That's the kind of stuff that should be taught at school. I know, it all should be. Out of confusion, clarity can rise. I'll drink to that. Michael Monahan says it like it. Okay, Rick writes, hi, David. Bob Proctor over the weekend taught that there are 3 types of goals. Types that you know, A, know that you can achieve. B, you think you can achieve. C, for creative best goal, because you don't know how you'll get there, but you visualize and have faith and belief that you see it as if it's in the present tense. 1 second. Let's see here. Whatever someone could see in their mind, they can have in their hand. You have to use your creative subconscious faculties, your thoughts in relation to alchemy. Bob Proctor stuff, it's really correct. It's correct. It's wonderful. He's an incredible guy. Really, just a quality person too. I mean, he really just used the feedback and results he got because of OMG to make it as the real factor in his decision for suggesting it so highly, as opposed to just kind of more mundane things. Um, so he's the real deal. He practices what he preaches. Um, what Bob is doing is giving you like a model that, as you believe in it and use it, it's like a shortcut that will basically it'll work for you. It's kind of like when you listen to Cotton and his mindset things. What you'll get in alchemy is sort of understanding how and why this works, and sometimes you won't have to believe in it kind of as a circular foundational thing. Like in the absence of doing this whole alchemy process, then if you don't believe in certain things, your only option is to either like believe in something without a foundation or not believe in it without a foundation, right? When we don't have like the core foundation that I'm giving you, then we have to make do without that. And so believing in useful beliefs, then it's more about if a belief is useful rather than not. So Bob helps you feel and believe in models that, if you, again, without this whole foundation, that are just going to be, you'll be better off operating within the gray area. And for people, like their whole life is like a gray area fundamentally, like especially around the what edges, boundaries, the context. So what I teach basically combines with what he teaches, and same with Cotton. So Cotton will say you need to believe the impossible, and like when he pictured and believed in himself as owning $100 million agency, and he would ask himself questions from that standpoint, and by believing in it, it breaks through blocks in your mind. And so believing in the impossible is basically correct and works. There's sort of a parallel thing where we can realize something isn't impossible unless it's inherently contradictory. We can realize that either something's inherently contradictory or it's possible, and that it's a matter of like resource management and so forth. And so we can get to the same place in an even clearer way sometimes, but they'll get you there correct, like kind of accurately in a few minutes, whereas this will take hours. It's kind of another way of sort of looking at it, except that this will have a different permanence to it and be more invulnerable to things that'll come up in the world. So you'll just have like the foundation. This very much matters to do alchemy, but using them both together is quite effective, and I benefit greatly from people's perspectives and things they figure out listening to Cotton and the things that he points out, Bob Proctor and what he points out and so forth. Oh, great. Yeah, Mike posted Bob Proctor's amazing endorsement. Oh, the alchemy, right. Yeah, he endorsed alchemy itself. It was really, really nice of him. It was really great. We have it on omgmachines.com/alchemy. Irene asks, sorry if this is out of context, but how do you work towards concentrating on anything that you're doing or listening to? As I find that I get distracted when I'm doing a task or listening to something with thoughts that are totally random, that has nothing to do with what's happening with the task or conversation. All right, so this is another case where it's counterintuitive how much we kind of take for granted that our brain already gets, that we never had the conversation, or it never had the conversation with itself, or it never ran through the scenario. I'm saying the same thing in different ways. So Irene, let's say you're working on a task that involves concentrating. You're actually assuming, and this is very normal, but it's fascinating actually to see this. You're assuming your brain knows, so to speak, or gets or calculates, whatever processes, that this is the task to be focused on exclusively for that time, within reason, unless the house is on fire or there's an important signal or trigger you have to pay attention to, right? So you actually assume kind of inherently with what you asked, Irene, and I love your question. I respect it greatly. great, just really, it's terrific. I wouldn't have thought to say this if you hadn't asked it this way. And what I'm saying is really good for people to hear. So, um, you know me, I get excited. I get excited about pointing out flaws in our own minds, right? Instead of getting, uh, it might otherwise be insulting, but of course here it's exciting. All right, here's a mistake, isn't that great? You're all making it, you know. Uh, anyhow, um, but you're so you in saying I'm sitting down concentrating on a task, I want to concentrate. Well, your brain has no idea, even though you think it does, right? So you're saying, oh, I want to do this, but your brain actually doesn't realize that. It kind of thinks that you sort of want to devote part of its attention to it, but also looking out for other goals that might be fulfilled at the exact same time, right? Um, so um, and literally then double checking or going over or however you want to call it, communicating with your mind or overseeing as a being watching over and seeking to make sure that your brain talks to itself and realizes that you want to focus exclusively on this task, and you can have some boundaries. You can say, unless that, like if the house is on fire or if there's some like important with someone, then okay. Other than that, and by giving it an actual boundary, that helps it to understand. Okay, even if it seems ridiculous, like the boundary, if that's good, that's fine. So give it a real boundary. The point of the boundary isn't that you're actually worried your house is going to be on fire, right? Without picturing that boundary of the house being on fire and you noticing and getting up, you almost certainly would have still stopped the task if the house was on fire. So the point is not about getting up if the house is on fire. The point is that you're giving it the boundary like that to show it. Other than that, I want you to focus. You see, the boundary is about what's inside the boundary. It's about expanding what's inside the boundary, not the other way. It's not restricting. It's enlarging. In this case, your focus or the amount of things you're not going to let distract you. You're saying if the house is on fire or some kind of similar emergency like that, I'll stop the task. But things less than that, I'm opening up as no longer being relevant for distracting me, and just make sure your mind sees it or gets it. And you do that very much in the same way that you might do if you were smart about getting someone else to understand something. If you're smart about it, you communicate with them. You don't just shout louder or talk condescendingly to another person, right? You try to give them a bit of a clear kind of consciousness field based, kind of real life, real scenario based communication to some degree. That's kind of tangible, right? And then you get a sense of whether it seems like they got it. In your own words, what I said, or something like that. But you just can get a sense of, like, you can say, like, does that make sense, and see how they react. If someone's like, yeah, then that's a good indication that it didn't make sense, right? People are over emphatic when they're lying. If they don't elaborate or give it back to you in kind of their own reality of things, their own sense of things, then they very well might not have understood it. If what you said was pretty obviously clear, then they well might have. But you just want to check and make sure that any kind of reasonable response might do. You can notice if they were probably distracted while they were talking to you. Then that's part of how you can tell. I'm pretty aware of that stuff. So as far as I can tell, I'm pretty good at spotting that. Mike would attest to it. Whether someone's paying attention and whether something made sense and they got it. So that can help, I think. Could it be from years of multitasking? Right, absolutely. Because literally your past experiences and how you do things will seem right to your mind. And so just like when you say something to someone and for years it means a certain thing. If take out the garbage, please, means ignore me, like don't bother, I'll do it anyway. If you don't do it, then that's one thing. If it means I'm going to yell and scream at you if you don't do it in the next 5 minutes, that's another thing, right? If it's, you'll get treated pretty nicely later if you do it, that means another thing, right? So what it's been meaning is the first meaning that your brain is going to take from it. If you want it to take a different meaning, then you have to take extra care to elaborate, or in your case of your own brain. It's nice with your own brain because you can communicate kind of in scenarios very clearly without worrying about how the other person's interpreting if you're talking slowly or over explaining and all that. People say, oh, you don't have to explain so clearly, or you don't have to, explain so much, or I would have known what you were saying. It's like, sure, yeah, sure you would have. But with your own brain, you don't have that issue, or unless you do, but you want to get over it, right? And obviously, if you have an issue with your own brain telling you, shut up, I don't want to understand what you're saying, or yeah, I get it, before they get it, right? If your brain is sounding like a teenager, then you want to resolve that. That's obviously not an effective way for your brain to be acting towards yourself. No offense to teenagers, to a caricature of teenagers, I might say, an archetype or a stereotype of teenagers. Great, yeah, so if that's what it means by default, then you need to change you need to say it in a different way, right? That's more clear to your brain. But that'll pretty much clear it up. I mean, it's really just a communication issue if you think that your brain gets something when it doesn't. There you go. All right. Awesome. Yeah, I bought the live stream myself, and I'll be going through it. Rick wrote, thanks so much for your answer. I'm seeking information in blending alchemy with other learnings. Win-win. Yep. Yeah. I'm glad the answer was sufficient. I would never feel like my answers are kind of partial answers and don't do things justice, but try to do it as well as I can. Very cool, Mike. Kevin was smart and asked Mike, who I mentioned is great at networking, if he has any materials on it. But Mike will keep it in mind. Great, and maybe there'll be a time when Mike could share something about networking. Maybe I can have an alchemy off. I use it as an excuse, but I might not. I'm too jealous of this time, right? We'll see. Haha, Mike affirms that if someone's checked out and not really listening, then I'll spot it. And Mike gives a super short, quick answer to Kevin's request for ideas on networking, and this relates to email marketing also, is that I begin by building leverage, just like Jim Crane, right? Exactly. So two people saying the same thing, and we knew it was right, but great to hear. Then when I come into the networking situation, I focus on pacing before leading. So for example, I'm really looking to listen, and I'm not looking to parade whatever leverage I've built from the beginning, and I'm much more looking to get a sense of the leverage that others have. Oh yeah, Mike is looking to see like who has the leverage. Although, of course, part of the leverage is getting the people around those people and working your way in. And appreciating that leverage genuinely. Great. Genuine appreciation is definitely something that Mike focuses on. And Mike definitely looks to give and build and bridge people. That tends to create an opening that when I do let the cat out of the bag, Mike is referring to the cat out of the bag about how much leverage he has and how great he is, on what I'm bringing to the table. You see? And Mike, of course, I'm Mike's biggest fan, genuinely. So he's amazing at networking. Shema writes, great answer on my sleep goal. This session is perfect for this goal. I have too many open goals and keep at it till I just collapse at night. And really, this meta strategy, this meta understanding of resolving things down to exactly one goal that's being worked on, possibly zero, but in most cases one, then it's nuts, right? It really is at the bottom of everything else that we're doing. Today's theme is so perfect. It's crazy, right? The 16th alchemy, and it's still just what we needed to hear. Don't get too spoiled. Maybe next one will be a snooze fest. But the less important it seems. Remember, the more value there might be in me showing you that it's important. And she writes, thanks, David, and BTY, much less anxiety. Oh, by the way, much less anxiety this week. Terrific. We talked about that. Wonderful. Love it. And did that come up on Saturday? Mitch writes, can you quickly go over the quick and dirty method of goal focusing again? Yeah, sure. What I say, and this is an old way of expressing it, that, again, it's quick and dirty. It's not about it being perfect, and there's different meanings of these words, and it could possibly be interpreted wrong, but there's a way to interpret this that's quite effective. So faith, we could also call it belief. I'm not talking about religious faith or not here when I say faith. I just mean like the kind of mundane, secular meaning of faith. Belief, focus, desire, faith. So my formula is focus, desire, faith equals results. And remember, this is kind of a shortcut. And it's not, it's kind of also another angle on what someone like Bob Proctor might be teaching you and so forth. Sorry, equals results. Okay, and what this means is where you want to focus this doesn't mean be focused. This is like an exercise you do sort of as a little bit part of your planning or setting. When I'm talking about setting a goal, I'm talking about literally setting it like your brain is like Jello or plastic, and whether a goal is really in there or not is like a physical truth, physical fact, reality, whatever. And that's what I mean by setting a goal. I don't mean like writing it down or not. If you write it down and it gets set in your mind, then you set a goal. If you write it down and it doesn't, then you didn't set a goal. You see what I mean? I'm referring to it being set in your mind or your brain. Also, what we've learned today is if you're smart, you want it to be triggered at the right times, and that's a separate issue. Okay, so where you want to focus is you want to focus on a vision of how the world would be after you achieve your goal, which is also a way to double check and make sure it's a building block or an opened bottleneck that you wanted. So Kevin might imagine that he networked and he went to a networking meeting and he's coming home and he thought, that's good, I can do that again. I made some progress. And I got some footholds that I can build on, maybe. All right. And he can adjust that if he figures out a better vision, then great. Or if he achieves that and wants a new vision, he can do that. But if you're writing a sales letter, you might imagine a person coming to your sales letter, reading it, feeling like that's what I was looking for. That's what I was looking for. I'm going to buy that. And then you might also imagine them, because what do you really want from a sales letter? Very possibly you want them to then open the product, enjoy and use the product. You can even imagine them thinking back on the sales letter and thinking, the sales letter told me to look out for this, then I would get that. I'm getting that. I see. I'm gonna make sure to not miss that in this product. And then they go out and they use it in a way that they like. And maybe they even let you know about that. And you can use your own judgment about how much you elaborate or how much you want to fill in things and how much you want to leave some things out. If you're going to write the sales letter after picturing that and you find you put too many things in there, you can reimagine it and let some things go. But you don't picture like the goal itself, kind of like not picturing the board. You picture how the world would be after the board is broken, right? Your fist is straight, your arm is straight, the board's shattered, and so forth. So and this will help you get the right semi-soft lock, right? It'll help you kind of picture just the right difficulty level that you think that if you channel your focus in taking action, which is separate than what I mean by focus here. Focus here, I'm talking about something you're picturing in your mind. but you're kind of also, this helps you find a good spot where if you channel your action, you can achieve that. There's another thing, by the way, you can do. You can use this to picture something properly vague, like you can imagine money flowing like into you as a kind of a metaphor, and then through you, and maybe growing. Maybe there's more of it. It flows into you, and then like even more of it flows out from you, or something like that. And that and you kind of, if you feel and understand that to be you're growing your income in this kind of abundant, relaxed way, right? That can work too. So some sort of focus on a vision that would be how you want the world to be, and the world could be that way, right? Where metaphorically, like what you mean by that vision is happening, where money's coming in, going through you, and it doesn't mean that you're spending it all, by the way. That it could mean that it's kind of going through you as like value coming in, and you're expanding it, and in doing so, you're also putting money in your bank account, right? But the money kind of stands for value. But in accomplishing that, you're kind of automatically accomplishing other things. However, it might work for you. And with women, with dating back over 12 years ago, I would imagine a woman. I wouldn't imagine the color of their hair, as I mentioned. I would try to just imagine I'm in a relationship and it's going well, and if something like we care about each other, we're attracted to each other, we have like a nice chemistry, and we have a connection where we can reach each other if something goes wrong and communicate. And I just picture that and kind of how it feels. You don't have to picture it vividly. If you kind of feel it and just picture a couple bits and pieces here and there, that can be fine. There's a point at which you can kind of feel it, and that only has to involve a little bit of visual and a little bit of whatever other senses if you want. That should be sufficient. And if it's not, if you feel like it's not active when you want it to be, then you reinforce it, right? You see what I mean? Like this, this isn't like a one and done or a one and fail thing, right? I like to never have processes that are set up to fail. So that's focus. Desire is you're also picturing it and you're feeling it, like the world being that way, and you wanna picture it and carry it, like look around the scenario and what you have when you accomplish that until you feel like, yeah, I want that. Like I want that building block, or I want that bottleneck being opened, or whatever. I want that result. If you just feel like you want that result, but in a way that is reasonably tied to you using it, or you profiting from it, or you mixing with your life and it improves your life and potentially other people's lives, but if you don't feel desire, the goal's not set because your brain hasn't connected it up to something that's motivating you yet, you see? So that's like a signal that it's like plugged into the battery when you desire it. It's not like you're trying to just psych yourself up into desiring it. You're trying to just kind of immerse yourself in it, in the result of it, until, like the result happening, until you feel like you desire it. And if you don't, then either there's a problem with the result and it's not a helpful result, or you just need to work backwards and forwards and sideways in your scenario until you get to a point of reality, like an imagination of the way the world can be, where it's helpful and you want it. You see what I mean? Like if you're like, oh, I picture a girl and we're happy, I don't know if I desire that enough yet. So of course most people would desire that, but if you don't, or if it's the networking thing and you don't know if you desire that strongly enough, then you imagine that leads to someone calling you up and saying, hey, I have some work, and it's the kind of thing that you know how to do. And like, is this the kind of thing you do? I'd love to contract with you to do it. And you might say, well, David, isn't that the new goal? It doesn't have to be, because if you feel like just doing some networking that starts the ball rolling, if you feel like, again, like just starting the ball rolling, coming back from a meeting, feeling like you started the ball rolling, but then you feel how that can connect up inevitably at some point with someone doing that, and then you're like, yeah, I want that, and then you go back once you feel like I want that with the person calling up and offering you the contract, then you go back, kind of you walk the scenario back like a little bit to where you are coming home from the meeting, like I said, and you feel like you got the ball rolling and feel like, do I desire that now? And you likely will, and if you don't, then maybe you do need to have your goal different, but maybe you just need to picture it. And really the way it works for me is I do like feel motivated enough. And what you might do is you might feel desire but still avoidance, and that's when you have to work on dissolving as a separate thing. But remember, you can reframe your goal into seeking understanding. So you can set a goal to have it happen where you're coming back from a networking meeting feeling good, like you want to do more because you got the ball rolling. And when you reframe, if you're having trouble with that goal in some way a little bit, then reframing it to, well, yeah, I want that. At least I want to understand how to get there. And then you'll often feel, it's easy to feel like, yeah, I want that for sure. Because there's often no blocks. Like gaining understanding is not really scary. I don't think. It isn't for me at this point. And if it is for you, then you can work through that too. You can gain understanding about gaining understanding. I'm not even being sarcastic, right? But it's perfectly feasible at this point that it's not scary, because you might not feel conflicted about gaining the understanding of how to get there, and that's your goal. You focus on how will it feel to understand how to get to where I go to a meeting, I come back and I feel good about how it went, just because I progressed a bit, like I got some, made a little bit of contacts and got the ball rolling a bit. Would it feel good if I understood how to get there? Okay, good. So now my new goal is to understand how. And now I feel motivated for that. I feel like I can seek understanding no matter what. Nothing's blocking me from that. I don't have any avoidance feelings about seeking understanding. You saw Kevin even was taking action. He wrote to Mike. He asked the question, right? Seeking understanding was easy. And that's fine. That's great. That's the trick. Seeking understanding is constantly easy and effective. It's the semi-soft lock. When I talk about seeking understanding, I'm literally giving you the fundamental semi-soft lock in life. No one could stop you. You'll feel like it, and so forth. The thing that'll work against it, I referenced last time, I'll continue to develop, is the feeling of, oh wait, things already fit. I don't want to look at it too closely, or else I might find they don't fit. That's the block to seeking understanding. As we dissolve that, to the extent that we have it, and in a lot of cases you won't have it, but if in some cases you do, then you'll realize that's the block, and you can learn how to dissolve that, and then you're back to where seeking understanding is a semi-soft lock. Okay, focus, desire, and then faith. The reason I write faith and belief is then you do a final check and you think, do I believe that that's possible for me to do? If you do that check and you feel like you don't believe it, then your goal isn't going to be, that's the goal is, it means the goal's not set. You see, because your brain won't set a goal that's going to feel like you can't do it, and then that's going to be also related to your self-confidence, that feedback trap and all that, the self-image. Once you don't have the self-image goal in the wrong way with the feedback situation, then you'll have less worry about this faith and belief block. You'll be less worried about making sure you're going to accomplish something before you do it. Plus, the seeking understanding will be something you'll have more confidence in, so you can reframe things that way and get around it. But one way or the other, you want to get to where you feel like you believe you can accomplish what you're going after. The simple answer is you can try to make the goal easier if there's an issue, but I'm helping you in a number of ways with the context to me to make you feel more like you believe you can achieve things because you have the meta strategies and the way of looking at the world where at least over time, by seeking understanding and by building on what you know, you believe that you can achieve it. Okay, so that is it. I'm glad I went through that actually, right? You never know what's going to happen when you ask a question around here. All right, I'll come close to winding things down here. But I probably addressed it right for you. Thank you. Mitch wrote, that's extremely helpful. I'm glad you did too. Thank you. Shema wrote, David, will you be going into leverage at some point like Mike Long uses? Mike writes, and I thank you for asking that. I'll write down the word leverage. Let me write it down where I wrote synchronicity down. I haven't forgotten about synchronicity. By the way, I have a simple starting answer for you on synchronicity. So funny when I'm talking, right? Write the craziest stuff, type the craziest stuff. Leverage, okay. And I'll read the rest of what Mike wrote in a minute in answer to Shema. But synchronicity, in one sense, looking there is like looking into something that we can't know. And the answer, the starting answer with worrying about synchronicity or asking about it, meaning like when things like might seem like a coincidence, but they worked in your favor, and you are wondering if that wasn't a coincidence. But it's kind of inherently something you can't really know. There might be aspects of it that you can know. You might know that like believing in it to some degree, or at least being open to it, or knowing that you can't know that it doesn't exist, you know. Can be helpful at times, or being open to it all the time could potentially be helpful. Or that could be a cluster where you want to see how is it that being open to the idea of synchronicity can be helpful. Let me see that, and then maybe I can understand something where I see the helpful thing in a clear way, and I'm always open in that way. But ultimately, when something isn't something that you can know, then there's somewhere else that you're going to have your focus better off. But again, there might be something about being open to synchronicity that we can know is helpful, and I'll give that some thought and I might come up with something. Let's see what Mike wrote to Shema. He wrote, alchemy is all about building leverage. Law of implication alchemy is by far the #1 way I build leverage. Very cool. And I'll look to further address that, but thank you, Mike. Mike further wrote, I have used and used and used this focus, desire, faith model that David is sharing now, and it's over the top powerful. Excellent. Shema wrote, Mike Long, Mike and David Mills, or Mike and David Mills, could you both role play at some point an example of how Mike has used it? We'll consider it. That might be fun. Or I might just turn the mic all the way over to Mike one day and see what happens. The law of attraction plus law of implication, one of the most potent concepts ever. Jamari writes, P.S. You won't be disappointed with the live stream, David. Bob Proctor and Sandy Gallagher threw down. Oh, I can't wait. That's wonderful. No, I bought it. I didn't even ask for it for free. I probably would. I told Cotton. He's like, you could have asked for it, from that. And I said, hey, I was motivated. I heard Bob talk, and I thought I would just get it, Must be a lot of happy campers here tonight, for sure. What a time to be alive, Michael J. Jamari writes. All right, continuing to wrap down, foundational understanding is an awareness similar to enlightenment. Thank you. Yeah, Michael, I agree. And I think it is kind of, like, I think for me, the idea of enlightenment, it kind of is getting the foundational understanding. Kevin, not like, that, and this might be a caricature. I'm not saying that anyone actually thinks of enlightenment this way, but not like that it's all an illusion or being detached from everything or some such. Kevin wrote, thank you. And Mike, of course, wrote #boom. And Shema said, new relationship with excellence. Now that I believe perfection is a possible goal, I'm living now with excellence at the forefront of my mind. Yeah, and specifically, again, with perfection, we let it be like a boundary in terms that we always want to resolve contradictions, and we want to be perfect in terms of not having contradictions, like as kind of a passive, or I don't know, like active when we're working on it specifically. Never like where we're disappointed in not being perfect, but where instead we're seeking to resolve contradictions in our mind. And then with good, it can be ever increasing and abundant. More good can be created. I'm not saying we create a perfect amount of good. I'm saying we get, we can get to where we resolve contradictions. And I'm not saying we do this without God. This is not man becoming God. You can't become God. God's God, right? So this isn't anything like that. It's pretty mainstream and normal in that way. But clearly, if there's anything we can do, if there's any free will that we can have, there's some leverage point that God's left open for us, and I'm just looking to maximize that. I'm not looking to do more than that. But I think what the leverage God's given us, I think things are rigged where we combine with how he's rigged it and how he'll respond and everything that he's rigged in the system that I don't even know of, but that God's actively doing, and so forth, then together that things can be perfect. So I just want to make that clear. You're welcome, Irene. You're welcome. Julie, mind blown again. Excellent. Deborah wrote, thank you, David. Too many goals at once right now, certainly. We're all dealing with this. And really, all bad feelings, it's incredible. Both bad feelings and lack of efficiency, which leads to lack of good results, which lack of even more good results is what I mean. We all get good results. We all get some amount of good. But but to whatever degree you can have more good and to whatever degree you experience bad, the root of it is these multiple conflicting goals that are active at the same time. And I'll be developing this, of course, with you. And in a sense, alchemy is fundamentally about getting our goals right, which involves figuring out the most effective one, or we're not always going to know the most possible effective thing we can be doing, but we can get better at narrowing down the gray area, and also where the gray area ends up being, and this is kind of a worldwide thing over time, but where the gray area ends up being what good to make, rather than that there's bad, ultimately. Focus, desire plus belief equals results. Deborah wrote, I'm trying to focus on one goal at a time, but they're interdependent. Correct, right, very good. Bryce wrote, thank you. I hope it all worked out okay for you with the studying. Bryce wrote, thank you. I hope to utilize this understanding to help me understand and focusing more on the material I will need to be a great engineer. Absolutely, and excellent. And I look forward to seeing that unfold, Bryce. Shirley wrote, thank you, David. This has been very enlightening and so relevant at this time. Wonderful. Susanna wrote, thank you, David. Great information, especially about focusing. You're welcome, Susanna. Thank you for writing that. Wayne wrote, alchemy seems like the distilled best parts of religion, science, and most of all, clarity. Well, thank you. That's wonderful. I appreciate that. Mainly, it's like nothing's off limits. We're looking to understand things. There's no agenda right here, just understanding. If I'm wrong, then I'm always open to that, but it needs to be addressed on the on the level of the ideas I'm talking about. Not just, oh, I disagree, or that sort of thing. It doesn't fit in the box, that sort of thing. Always trying to clarify, not like force something into someone's model or belief system, including for myself. Thank you, Dave. What gets me excited is when most of all, right, is when I get clarity for myself, when I figure out something that was wrong in my mind and get it right. Sally writes, thank you, David. So relevant for me. Many takeaways. Wonderful. That's so great. Sean writes, thank you, David. I had too many goals as well. And by the way, goals are okay that are not active, right? Of course, if they're things that can get triggered at the wrong times, or if they're for things that we don't really want the result of actually, then great. The more we dissolve those, the less clutter to resolve, actively, right? Of course. Sean, I had too many goals as well, and was getting trusting. Oh, kind of like too trusting of your own mind, perhaps. Now I know I need to focus my mind on active goals while keeping the inactive for the appropriate moment. Another mind blown. Excellent. Exactly right, Sean. Brian writes, thank you, David. Thanks, David. You have helped making choices so much easier. Great. And I'll keep doing it. Have some great stuff lined up that I was thinking of covering this one, but that's cool. We have more to come. I can see clearly now the rain is gone, Michael. We should all sing that. Sean writes, thanks, David. It's good to be back in your alchemy session. So much to learn. Great to have you back, Sean. And Shama writes, alchemy and having these live sessions with you, priceless. As long as I get to 10 million bucks, that's fine with me. Doesn't have to be fully priceless. Incredible, mind-shattering, wonderful. And I hope to put the pieces back together after I shatter your mind before we finish, so I don't leave you. They'll leave you broken. You're welcome, Jamari, who writes, thanks for more gems, David. I'm going to listen to Brain FM, sleep track, and then wake up and perform a creative task like we talked about last time. Exactly right. Excellent. All right, 10 millions. I got one. All right, we're there. And I've gotten one or two before. So wonderful. I appreciate you guys so much. I'll end the webinar in a minute or two. $10 million Snoopy. Excellent. 10 million. Got one from Michael then. I'll take that. It's a 10 million. In terms of what we'd recommend to a friend if it was the only way they could possibly get their hands on alchemy. Would it be worth earning the money or paying the money? Bryce writes, focusing it on one problem at a time is the key to success. My professor said, don't look at the whole house, look at the brick you need to place. Right, exactly. And yet the fascinating thing is that our brains don't really get that, right? Or we can realize that as an engineer, and yet then we go home to our spouse and we'll have a conflict with them. We won't even realize it. We'll want them to do something. They'll be in a different vector direction, and we won't realize how to resolve that properly. And that's certainly that's my secret with relationships. It's why it's what I mean when I say I get to relationships. Is fundamentally having that understanding and applying that in all kinds of different ways gives you kind of a new magical additional alchemical ingredient to relationships, in addition to all the skills and success you may already have with those. And you may have all kinds of charisma and talent that I don't have with relationships, with parenting, all that. But then I can give you this ingredient, and we're in the house. Alchemy is the secret sauce of OMG. That's right, Rick. You're welcome, Dudley, who says thank you. And you guys all have a great night. I left you with a free bonus half an hour, right? I'll be going for about 2.5 hours this time. What are you going to do with yourselves that extra half an hour? Got on late and still many aha moments. You're welcome, Frederico. You're welcome, John, who says thank you. Alchemy is such a blessing. Wow, over 100 people again. We just get so many people on these sessions, even though it wasn't, it's not explicitly part of OMG when we're marketing it. So it's great that so many people see the value in it. And of course, the replay is so readily available. It's amazing to see that most of the time the core ingredients that make success are repeating themselves again and again. Yeah. There's not that much in terms of meta strategy in life, but realizing it clearly and realizing that it's the opposite of what our brain will often do by default. That's part of the key, right? That it won't feel right and important to do the right meta strategies until and unless we kind of clearly reverse that, kind of get it wired up right or seeing right with our mind. But we can lead our mind to see that it's correct, but it just has to be like a conversation, so to speak, that we have and kind of see from different angles. Okay, brain, short of a shark attack, focus on this. Here's Dave for the shark. Either a real shark attack or Dave Keys dressed as a shark coming after us. Either one of those, we'd want to stop what we're doing. That's great, Dave. Wonderful. Awesome, Tyler. And you're very welcome, John, who wrote, thanks, David. Enjoy you and so appreciate you pulling the curtains on how to clarify my goals. And you're welcome, James, who says, thanks, David. We'll have to rewatch this. For sure. People always report that it's like a whole new webinar each time. Not sure if that's a good or bad thing, but even the third or fourth time, sometimes that's the case. And you might find that not once you get around to it and have enough time. We're doing a live alchemy, so it's hard to watch them the third time, but it'll often happen that you'll be like, wow, even the third time. As far at least for other stuff I've done. Maybe I'm the new genius of clarity. Maybe two will be enough. Starting now. Take care, Dave, and everybody. Appreciate you guys so much, and I will see you guys, whoever can make it, but I hope you do, on Saturday morning next week.